Hi everyone, really great to have you joining us. If you could just, in the chat room, if you could just say who you are and where you're from, it's great because it just enables us to navigate a little bit and make sure that we get this right for you. I'm Stephen Cox from Cyrus Educational. We're here to try and make your job easier and better. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined both by Katie Granger from Cyrus Educational and the main man for today, Martin Morgan. Martin's been head of 3 schools, 2 in London, 1 in Wales, various other coast schools. He's worked with over 200 schools on improving the strategy and working on how do we stress test what's actually happening within this school and getting it right for the pupils. So without more ado, I'm going to blast over to Martin. Well, Katie's going to say a quick hi, and then we'll get on with Martin and we'll get it right into the detail of how can we actually supercharge this SIP process, particularly with COVID, obviously, and what may have deflected or may have at least buffered where we were heading. Katie.
Brilliant. Hi everyone, I'm Katie and I'm the Client Relations Director at Cyrus. So it's nice to meet everybody, and I'll hand over to Martin.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thanks for the introduction, Stephen and Katie. So I'm a former head teacher, as said by Stephen. I've worked as an education consultant for the past 5 years. And I've been very fortunate to have co-presented with some wonderful education figures, including Professor John Hattie, Carol Dweck, Dylan William, Mark Burns, and I've got to say I've learned quite a lot, and I'm continuing to learn as a consultant. My expertise has always been in the area of school improvement, and as Stephen said, worked with over 200 schools, possibly even more than that now, specifically on strategic planning and how do we make the best of what we've got. So today we're going to have a little look at how do we take our school improvement planning and think about how effective and strategic it is, as well as how do we develop the capacity and capability of the staff that we're working with at the moment. I've got no doubt that your roles as leaders is a phenomenal job, and from my own experience, I think we're constantly juggling a myriad of roles, tasks, responsibilities, and probably even more so now during this existing pandemic. I think schools have had to look at options for online, in school, blended approaches, and they've got themselves ready for everything and +1, only for things to then change again. So I think we're in a constantly changing environment. But I think we've got an opportunity to think more strategically and to decide on the key focus. And for me, it was the quote from Stephen Covey, which was, to keep the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And I think that's a really crucial thing. And if I was to ask people, what is the main thing in your school? I'm really, really hoping it's going to be that it's learners' outcomes, learners' progress. You know, it's not going to be we're having a brand new boiler or we've got great new windows being fitted next week. We can be easily distracted by lots of things that are happening. And I have worked with schools who have procedures and routines and norms for things like fire drills, evacuations, COVID-19, lunchtimes, and rightly so. But teaching is just left to the classroom. I think we have an opportunity now to refocus and prepare for during and beyond COVID-19 in terms of school improvement planning. You're probably wondering what this picture is, and you know, I think for me, this really sums up some of the school improvement plans and documents I see. They are so big that it's almost impossible to get traction. I mean, how many headings do they have, and what do they really tell us about the impact on students? I was recently with a school who had an 80-page document as their school improvement plan. It was an Excel spreadsheet, which you could pull up the filters of everything, which looked amazing. But it came to the point that we realized there were so many priorities, there actually weren't any priorities. So we really need to be thinking about the bigger picture in terms of school improvement planning and not just creating fancy and attractive documents. When we look at the issue around school improvement planning, is a lot of evaluation is left to the last minute as well, to the end of the cycle. just before it's too late to remedy and alter the course? Well, we all know what happened with the Titanic. There is a hint in the name. It was so big it couldn't actually avoid the iceberg. And I do wonder, if it was smaller, would it have missed, and would there be a different story today? So my role today is to take you through some opportunities to look at what is effective school improvement planning, what are strategic plans for sustained improvement, and how can we develop the capacity and capability of staff, particularly during this period of change. The first model I want to take you through is a visible learning logic model. And we use this to support leaders and teachers in order to bring about ongoing and sustainable improvement in learner progress. This is about developing a whole system that enables students, teachers, and leaders to continue their progress. Now, one of the key things is it's built around the visible learning research and practice. Now, this is global research which underpin everything. There's a huge amount of data out there available to us in terms of the visible learning research. And the key question is, how often are we using this data and this information? In terms of this logic model, what we want to do is take the research and then identify a series of strategies, professional learning opportunities, and potential resources that are going to enable us to make that progress that we want. Once we've identified those three key areas, which I'm going to take you into more detail as we go through this session, but we can only then can we start to think about implementation and engagement. What often happens is we think of a priority, something that needs addressing, and we go straight to implementation without thinking about, what does the research tell us? What strategies do we already have to hand, and what strategies can we find out about that might be useful? What professional learning is out there, or what expertise do we have within the school that might be able to enable us to do more? And what resources are we going to need in order to make that? The implementation part is really crucial, and if we don't get that right, then it's going to be a struggle with all the mind frames, the knowledge, and the skills.
Martin, before we just jump onto the implementation part, I love this diagram because I saw quite a bit being created and was asked to comment on it initially, and it was a lot more complex than this when it first came out. And I think there's a crucial bit here for leaders is, can you actually turn your strategy into a diagram? Because without being able to turn it into a diagram, it's very, very difficult to convey that information. And then the implementation just becomes that much more awkward. And those little arrows you see, they've got to go somewhere. Now, in this case, it all circled back on itself, which is wonderful to see. However, it just becomes so much more complex then, because new people coming to see it can't see the logic in it. And so it's, how do you simplify that and get the practice into it? I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Totally agree, Stephen. I think one of the key things is, how do we turn what our thoughts are into some sort of model that we can actually, and there are other models out there, like Peter DeWitt's got his logic model, Jenny Donahoe's got the one that she uses for evaluation, which I'm actually going to show later on as well. But one of the key things is, having this model in front of you enables you to avoid jumping straight from the this is what we need, our priority, to the doing. And it helps you identify, well, actually, we need to look at what the research is telling us. We need to look at what professional learning there is available to us. Because I think we're all very good at jumping from, I need to address this, and go straight into, let's do it, without the thinking. And a logic model enables us to stop doing that and think about all those processes and steps where we go.
Nice.
Okay, so so when we're looking at this logic model, I'm going to break this down a little bit closer into what we term impact cycles in a moment. But obviously, we need a lot of things there that we're looking for, but we're aiming for this enhanced student outcomes, and we get those by having enhanced leadership practice, by enhanced systems and enhanced teaching practice. And there are lots of things that we might need to look at in order to get these student outcomes. It's kind of like having the big picture again. You sort of like, you don't want a school improvement plan that's massive, but we don't want all our plans to be linked to a logic model like this. But we do want to be thinking about, well, what are we looking for in terms of cycles? And we have something in visible learning which is called an impact cycle, and I'm sure you've come across them across the UK, where we talk about impact cycle 1. We're looking to improve the system, the school leader, the teacher, and the learner. And then in impact cycle 2, we're looking to improve that even further, and in impact cycle 3, so that in the end we've got significantly improved outcomes. Now, that might not make a lot of sense when you just see it like that and you think, well, what is an impact cycle? So I've unpicked one of them, and this is the one that we use a lot of. So we've got 6 points on these impact cycles. The one that's often forgotten about is point 6, which is evaluating the impact, which we're going to look at later on. But if I take you through them really briefly, the first thing is we've got that school engagement. So have we got a system where we're ready for professional learning and we're going to look at change? Go into a bit more detail in number 2, which is the scoping, and that's our baseline evidence. That's purely what it is. It's not about making changes, but it's about, well, what are we doing well? What's not working so well? This is all we're doing at this stage, is creating a baseline of evidence about what's happening in our school. And that could be, on the simplest term, it could be that 80% of our learners are able to articulate what a good learner is, or 20% of our learners did not understand what it meant to be a good learner, but we're getting very specific. Once we go through this impact cycle, the idea is to keep going. When we get back around to number 1, we've then got new issues and new things to address and new things to change, so that we're constantly building, which you'll see is why it's built as stages of cycles 1, 2, and 3. If we look at monitoring, number 5, how often do we monitor our school improvement document? And I think that's a real crucial factor, because quite often we forget to do that. We kind of create this school development plan or improvement plan, put it to one side, and it gets pulled out at the end of the year when we've got to evaluate it, share it with governors, share it with parents, share it with staff, and we tick off whether we've achieved these things or not. And I think if we're not constantly doing this monitoring, then we're really going to be struggling to find out whether we're on target, whether we're on track, or whether we're way behind, or whether something needs changing now, and why wait until the end.
So I saw a beautiful use of this particular diagram in one school. They were looking at success criteria. So it was all of the Key Stage 1 team were looking at it. And so they were, let's concentrate on maths and literacy at this particular, numeracy and literacy. And we'll have 2 success criteria for each child. So they've set up what their engagement plan is. They've got some specificity on it. Now they've got to get their evidence. So they'd initiated it, but they had to do their baseline evidence. So they shared these success criteria with each of the learners. And so their evidence, they decided they were going to video each child, and each child was going to say on the camera what the success criteria were in numeracy and maths. This was their baseline. Anyway, when they'd done this, not one child could actually articulate what the success criteria were. They went through the whole impact cycle diligently. At the end of the impact cycle, they redid the evidence. 50% could now tell them what their success criteria were. They went through a second impact cycle. They got it up to 80%. And you can guess who the 20% of learners were, who were then going to struggle, because at no point had they really understood what success criteria were and how relevant they were. But it was only by following these very exacting steps that the staff really got the implications of it and really were able to act on it. And I think we bypass this and think, oh yeah, it's obvious, it's stuck, but it has not.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think bypassing engaging is quite an interesting concept that Vivienne Robinson talks about quite deeply. And I'm going to mention the engaging process quite shortly. Anyone would think we'd planned that question, Stephen, but I think you're right. It's only when you break it down and you watch it step by step and you go through it and realize that you are making steady progress, and that there are things you need to do with some learners that you didn't have to do with others. There are targets that you need to bring out, and there's ways of teaching, and it's having that different approach which allows you then to build on that iterative cycle that allows it to grow. And so when you go from 0 to 50 to 75 to 80, it's progress. That's a real positive thing. But not only that, you can see where it's gone well and how it went well on each of those stages. Quite an interesting thought to that, which leads me on nextly, is this notion that we've identified a priority, and we're going to go straight out and we're going to work with the children on it. But have we actually thought about the teachers? Because I think we do have a right to allow people additional sort of space and time and freedom in order to develop their capacity. Otherwise, we can't expect them to improve, and we can't accept them. So do we really consider the needs of for want of a better phrase, the starting points of the teachers when we're asking them to do this? Because we could say, let's go out and develop success criteria, as you mentioned in your example. And one teacher's got real clarity around what success criteria is, what it looks like, and how to use it, and how to develop it, and how to co-construct it with learners, whereas another teacher doesn't. And so what we've got is two very different starting points. So the work we need to do to support those teachers is very different. So if we're going to change that and we're going to build that culture, then I think there's no doubt that we have evidence in schools. I think it's crucial, though, that we create a culture that uses this evidence, not just for the purpose of performance management, but for improvement. And that's what it's got to be about. Teachers I know, I've worked with a lot of them over the years, and they can be quite skeptical about data evidence. The problem is a lot of that data is being used to judge them, and when it's being used to judge them, they're less likely to accept it. If that data is not used to judge and is about improving the class or the learners, then perhaps they would accept it more openly. Equally, if they deem the change educationally important, then perhaps they're more likely to engage in it. And I guess that comes down to the point of who decided this was a priority for a school. Is it a focus? Is it something that needs addressing? Is it relevant for that teacher who's doing really, really well with success criteria and their learners? Is that a priority now to develop success criteria, or is it something that they want to work on more? So the relevance to the teacher is quite important. And I learned that kind of the hard way when I was a head teacher of one of my schools. We had a key issue around reading data. And I adopted what is called by Vivian Robinson a bypassing approach, where I actually had a change agenda, which was reading needs to improve in school. Here's a set of strategies I've come across. I like these. I know they worked in my previous school. So I had my theory of action around them. And then I just gave them out to staff and told them basically, with a little bit of training, to get on with them. What actually happened then was some teachers who were actually not using that strategy, but were actually using a better one, changed to my strategy. And you can just guess, the results got worse. Other teachers thought they were using my strategy already, but they weren't. So not a lot of outcomes changed. In fact, in some cases, they became poorer. The engaging model is the idea is that the leader has an idea, or it could be a teacher later on. And you discuss this, you get an agreed evaluation of each theory. You understand what both of you are saying in terms of what it is you mean by a reading strategy. For example, we brought up what is repeated reading. One teacher thought it was, I constantly read over the same line again, so I learn the words, etc. Whereas actually it was a strategy that's introduced for early years. And we know that children who are at home, they tend to read the same book time and time again. If you've got children of your own, you'll have that child who'll say same story over and over again. My daughter was sharing a shell every night, sharing a shell. Now she could tell me that book word for word without actually seeing the words now. And we had to get an understanding of what each theory was. Now, the idea then was, do we agree to change to this strategy, or do we decide not to change? And that's where engaging becomes more powerful, because we can actually have a better dialogue. We can get this understanding about what each of us are thinking and why we're thinking it. Another model which is quite useful. So we've talked about logic models, and these are for leadership teams and looking at bigger pictures, but the teacher wants to look within their class. This is a model referred to by John Hattie as teachers are to die for, and we can see how this allows classroom practice to improve. So we've got the D, which is a diagnose. Then we've got the I in quadrant 2, which is intervene. Then we've got implement, and then we've got evaluate. And again, it's a cycle. It's a cyclical process where we go back. At the diagnose stage, what we're doing is we're looking to see, have we got a range of assessment strategies to identify what the learner brings to the table? So what are their starting points? Who already knows all of it? Who knows none of it? And I think Mark Burns does this very effectively with his work and his programs, and in his book Teaching Backwards, where they look very specifically at starting points, look at things like pre-mortems. So we're looking at having a range of assessment strategies that we can identify where our learners are at. The intervene section, then when we go into intervention, we're talking about, do we have choices? Do we have multiple interventions to change the way we teach and how we teach? Can we adjust our planning or having a plan B? Maybe no more whole class teaching. If we've got a wide range of abilities within our class, could we teach to groups within the class, and how would we do that? But having a plan B in this intervention stage and looking at multiple different ways of doing it is really crucial to getting classroom practice improving. Then we go into the implement. And again, we've already talked about, we've got diagnosis, which is our baseline. We talked about intervene, having lots of strategies and ideas. And now we're going into implement, which is, in order to implement them, we've got to have a deep knowledge. We've got to have a deep knowledge and understanding of the practices required to implement anything well, really. We know that not everything works all the time. We know there are some strategies which are really effective for surface learning, but they may have no impact as we move to deeper, and vice versa. So it's about having a deep knowledge and understanding of these so that when the time comes, we choose the right strategy for the right event. And then, of course, what's often left out of our cycles is this evaluation phase. And this is about having the skills and the methods and that ability to debate what impact has happened as a result of what we've done. Or if there hasn't been any impact, why not? And how can we improve that impact further?
I think absolutely crucial, Martin, and this is a lovely diagram. I think it ultimately applies to staff learning as well. I really like the point you were making about the need for specificity on what we're trying to achieve. And certainly with what we're seeing with the implementation strategies, I mean, there's a very controversial piece of research. Well, it's lots of research out there about the effectiveness of teaching assistants. Where they've been found to be 0 to 0.1 in terms of effectiveness. Now, I think if we looked at the effectiveness in terms of the input they're doing, yes, they're doing it, but it's whether they're applying the right strategy at the right time for that particular individual. And this is why this diagram is so useful, because that diagnosis part becomes absolutely crucial.
Oh, yeah, totally, Stephen. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, you look at programs that used to run in school, things like Springboard 3, Springboard 4, Springboard 5, and you'd say the same children were on those programs in year 3 that were on year 4 and in year 5, and you think, well, it didn't work for them in year 3. Why are they on the program in year 4 now? So what other interventions or strategies have we got that we could use?
Absolutely. So, these are the challenges that we have.
Totally.
To get work.
Yeah, so another model I found really useful for teachers and leaders, and I came across this when Jenny Donoghue was presenting at the World Conference a couple of years ago, and it's a very effective model, because I would have liked to have brought it up in each section, but it's all there in one hit so you can see it, and it'll be in part of your downloadable materials. But when we look at results from joint work, we can have a look at 2 outcomes. There was an improvement in student outcomes, or there was no improvement in student outcomes. And I think for us, what we've got to think about, well, if there was an improvement in student outcomes, do we have a clear understanding of why, and how and why results were achieved? Or if we have no understanding of why and how results were achieved. So there's a real good thing here, because we can get improvement in student outcomes but have no understanding of how we got them. If we did have an understanding of how we got them, is there something we can do to share with others? If we don't understand, was it luck, or was it something that we did that made the difference? And I think the same, we can still learn when there's no improvement in student outcomes. Because if we've got a clear understanding of why the results were achieved, and these weren't positive results, then what did we learn and what do others need to know as we're going forward in another cycle and trying to improve? This is from Jenny Donahue's and Velasco's book, The Transformative Power of Collaborative Inquiry. It's a very good read. I'd highly recommend that. So I think we've got to really have a look at the cause effect, not just say we've achieved it, let's move on. Let's think about why we achieved it, or we didn't achieve it. Let's move on. Let's think about why we didn't achieve it. I'm just going to put a...
I was going to say, Man, I think this is the problem of complexity that schools are facing now, isn't it? There's so many moving parts. And since we've had the Education Endowment Foundation, it's unpicked really easily relationships, say, between a reading intervention program and reading scores. But once you try and do something more complex that works across a whole school, certainly, number one, the RCTs aren't showing up well on any of the whole school programs. But, you know, realistically, if you then, and what it doesn't show in an RCT is if you concentrate on the reading program, that's where all your stuff goes. You move resources away from other things that you're doing. And it's not actually looking at what the impact on those is. It's only looking at the reading scores. What Jenny's trying to do is take the whole school, which is where you're at with your school improvement programs.
Totally, and I think that kind of leads nicely on to sort of the number of priorities that we have and that we try to focus on. And I already mentioned too many priorities, and none of them are priorities. And I'll just play a little video. Some of you might be familiar with this. It's the Office America.
Gus? Okay, if you're not going to interview me, then I'll do it. Yes. What will be your first priority? I will have 7 first priorities: safety, profits, fostering a community of self-reliance and entrepreneurship, listening, respect for human life, bolstering our public image, and getting everyone home on time. Dwight, let me be...
And I think when you have so many priorities, it's quite easy to lose track of all of them. And I think the models, the logic models, the cause-effect relationships, they enable us to sort of look at various ways and keep those priorities in focus. I'm certainly, you know, thinking about our priorities and call them priorities or goals or targets, whatever you want to call them. But from my perspective, you're thinking about leaders need to set really, really strong goals. They need to make student progress the school's top goal. It's got to be the top goal, because where goals are weak, we get achievement that is easy and we tick them off, and then you get coasting. Now, you're probably all familiar with SMART targets. In visible learning, we use something called SMARTer. The A is changed to, instead of achievable, it's ambitious. And in terms of the E and R, that's evaluate and reevaluate, because I think it's so important that we keep these goals in the front of what we're doing. Destination is crucial. Having a target, we've got to know where that destination is. The staff need to know where we're heading to. I think if goals stay in your head or they're buried deep in a huge document, they just remain dreams and they never get achieved. And I'm sure a lot of you have felt that way when you've come across documents that you've worked with other teachers or schools over the years, and you've got to the end of the year and you thought, I didn't even realize that was a target. I haven't been working on that, or I've been working on this and it's not even in there anymore. So having those is great, but then in order to achieve these goals, we've got to create this baseline, which is A, the reality, B is our future. What's the discrepancy between them? What's the difference? And what is it that I need to do to support you, to help you achieve your goals as a leader? Goals are often set with insufficient consideration on how to get the commitment from staff. And it's quite often they go from, being on a piece of paper, and then suddenly they end up as being a huge target at the end of the year. So I think what we really need to do is make sure that they're clear to everyone. Teachers also need to accept there's a gap. It's quite a tricky one. Accepting that there is a gap is not always easy for people to do. We know the whole quote about truth passing through, 3 stages, where first it is ridiculed, second it is violently opposed, and then third is accepted as being self-evident. But we've got to get to that stage where the truth is accepted. There is a gap here, there is pure progress, or there's something that needs addressing. I'm just going to switch to a quick video. And this is about prioritizing.
Every morning I rank my tasks as A, B, or C priorities.
And then you work on the A priorities first.
To be honest, after I update the list, there isn't much left in the tank.
And I think we've all been there where, we've got so many things going on. We create this list, we rank it, we create, whichever way we do it, A, B, or C, and then that's the rest of the day gone. We're exhausted just from creating the list. So I think having a logic model keeps the priority at the front of everything we do, because we can easily be distracted by things that don't count. And that's, Einstein's quote that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And I think it's quite important to keep that at the front of your mind. This is all, I'm sure this is all well and good, but none of this works without clear communication. Without a small change, without communicating that small change, it can make a big difference to whether something is successful or not. I've had experience that over the years where I thought I communicated it, but it goes back to, and if you haven't come across it, the Gordon Wells Meaning Makers book, where we say one thing and we have a mental image of the world and we are explaining something from our perspective, and the people listening have a different mental image of what we're talking about. So that small change is not happening.
I think, Martin, this ties in as well with some of the research that we're seeing, that teachers kind of have mental models in their mind, and every teacher's mental model is very different and depends on their experience, their upbringing, their values, their beliefs, if you like, their truths. And when we're talking, often we're not talking to that mental model in their mind, we're talking across it. It's one of the problems of getting research to stick in teachers. If it doesn't fit with a mental model, it's very, very difficult for them to adapt it into their practice. And we underestimate how difficult that is. So going back to that diagram right at the beginning, having it explained diagrammatically with real crisp clarity really helps it, because that can be shown to everyone. They can see what the stages are and how it works. So suddenly we're getting away from lists. I'm getting away from big documents. We're now just on one diagram to kind of sum it all up. And if you can't articulate it like that, you've got to ask the question, has it got the clarity that's needed?
Yeah, of course. I can always remember Mark talking about a teaching and learning document that was 20 plus pages long. And, if you've got that many priorities in terms of teaching and learning, then again, none of them are going to get achieved. And everyone's interpretation of each of those priorities and thinking that they're already doing what it says in the document, or not understanding. And I think it does ask the question about, why do we need these big, huge school improvement plans or school improvement documents where we can have a strategic logic model which will enable us to develop actions from that and evaluations.
You reminded me of another school Mark was talking about. He said, fantastic school, really up for it. And they had teachers who were up for it. So they decided they were going to introduce 32 new theories, one for each week of the year. And that was going to be their inset. So it was all done through Twilight. He came in and looked halfway through the year and he said, stop, please. Your staff are actually blown out. Yeah. None of this is getting implemented. It's just shooting all over the place. And yeah, it was done for the right reasons. But yeah.
Of course, yeah. Yeah. Of course, I don't think leaders, teachers do anything for the wrong reasons, that the heart's in the right place and they go down there. And the question of time is a big factor, where we've got a short amount of time to do this. So the priority in terms of prioritizing is make sure you give yourself the time to realize what is a priority and put that through. Some of the work I've been doing with schools recently you talk about 30 odd strategies. I've got about 70 different questions, but I would never use all 70 at one time. And so, for example, if we're looking at curriculum, I've got about 5 or 6 questions around curriculum. If we're looking at pupils who are struggling in classrooms, I've got 5 or 6 questions around those. If we're looking at about people talking about finances and resources and teachers, that I've got questions around. So there are lots of questions we can ask. And I think the way we improve things is by constantly questioning what we're doing. And I know, Stephen, you mentioned something about red teaming, and you were talking about a strategy.
Sure, I was contacted by someone on LinkedIn and they said, we do red team. And I was like, what's red team? I'm really interested. So what red teaming is having someone come in and stress test your strategy, which I think is absolutely fascinating notion. I run a Cyrus Educational, so I thought this is great. Let's try that. How many experts can I get in? And my goodness, you just don't think of things the way that other people think of things. And having that kind of external challenge come in and say, well, why are you doing this way? And it makes you either justify or open yourself up to learning. And I love that kind of notion that Vivian Robinson's has of open to learning and relational trust. And, so if you don't want to be challenged, don't have a red team. But the red team, the whole point is you ask them, come on, stress test what I've got. Stress test these assumptions. Is it simple enough? Am I going to get through all stuff here? Because often you can't see it. We see the world through our rose-tinted spectacles. It's really good for our happiness and our kind of mental health and welfare, but we do tend to miss a load of pieces around. And if we had to look at all those pieces all the time, we'd probably feel quite depressed about life. But when we're doing it at a strategic level, it's really good to have those blind spots really picked and unpicked for us until we get that excessive clarity of the strategy. So yeah, red team. If you ever hear red team, you know what it is, and someone does red team, which we do at Cyrus, but it's there for you.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work I would do when I'm going in on strategic planning is looking at challenging people's plans and policies and systems, and not making assumptions, which sometimes leadership teams do make assumptions around what they think is working and is not working. I do get the opposite as well, where I've gone in and I've delivered training to a group of teachers, and the head teacher said to me, everything you've told them today or trained them in today, I've been trying to get them to do this for the last 3 years, and now suddenly they're motivated and want to do it because you came in. And I think, having an external party can really help, but can be an internal group as well. If you've got a strong team that can challenge the leadership, and it could be a group of middle leaders, you could really get them to challenge the perspective of where the leadership think the school is and where you think it is as a middle leaders.
I think that's where the triads was aimed at doing. So you use head teachers from one school to another. The problem was that they knew each other a little bit, and therefore they knew they were sitting on the top of the pile. I remember that on the first international school I worked in, ECIS had just brought out a new evaluation program, and all I could see when I read through this, the head said, have a look at it, you understand strategy a bit. I looked through this document and thought every bit of blame is going to shoot up the system and end up with head teacher. I said to the head teacher, I wouldn't do this if I was you. And he said, no, it's the ECIS one. I said, well, it's going to hit there. And he did it, and he lost his job that year because it's a bit more fickle than obviously domestic systems.
So I'm going to leave it there. Obviously, in terms of time, we've got that. Our 40 minutes are up, and quite happy to have questions and people to sort of think. I haven't had an opportunity to read the chat room as we're going through, so I'm not really sure if there are any questions in there that aren't answered. But certainly, if the questions are saved and Katie's got your email address and that, I can certainly get back to you with any answers and responses.
Great. So if there are any questions, just put those ones in. There is one question I was going to ask you, Martin, just because obviously you're working with an awful lot of schools and you see it there. What would you say was the biggest block then on this whole strategic process in terms of getting it operating from where the leaders are connecting with it to where the teachers are connecting with it and to where what happens in the learners in the classroom? What biggest block?
I think there's no link between the research, the professional learning, and then the implementation. And I think we get lots of, when I go and look at school improvement planning, it's the size of the document or the time it's been taken to create it. It's the amount of things that are in it, how accessible it is. You can, documents can be saved on a head teacher's laptop or in a shared drive, but no one looks at them. It's clarity and agreement, sort of, do people, and as I mentioned about the reading strategy, do we have the same understanding about what we're talking about? And I guess it's quite often, and I did this quite a lot in my early years of a headship. I made the mistake of thinking, this is where we need to get to, this is our destination, but I hadn't taken account of the reality and where my actual staff were. And I rushed them through trying to get something achieved, whereas actually they weren't ready for it. They needed more training, they needed more support. And one final thing I'll add to that is evaluation. If you leave a plan or a target or a priority or a goal to evaluate it right at the end of the year, then it's luck if you got it achieved, or it's bad luck if you didn't. And I know a school that's rewritten, I wouldn't say rewritten, but had created a feedback policy, and they regularly review it. And that might just be a 5-minute snippet in a staff meeting and saying, what have you changed? And they're changing that and updating that policy based on practice that's making a difference. And if someone comes in with a strategy that's really made a difference, they're saying, great, can we all try that out before we put this in the policy? I'm currently working with a special school near Chester, and that's exactly what we're doing, getting clarity on student progress through a program that Mark Burns and Andy Griffiths wrote, the Osiris Teacher Intervention. So if you want more information on that, Katie can give that, or she can give you my email address and we can have some discussion around that.
Yeah, it's quite difficult moving into the special ed arena, but I know that's something you've done, Martin. Someone else was asking differences between primary and secondary, because obviously we have folks from both on here. What would you say are the key differences when it comes to strategy and getting across?
In key differences in primary and secondary, not, to be honest, it's not a lot, Stephen. And I think if you look at the logic model at the beginning, it works in both settings. It works in primary, it works in secondary, it works in higher ed, and it works in special, because the principles are there. What is the research that's underpinning everything? And then what are the strategies, the systems and things that we need to put into place? You can talk about staffing and size of schools till the cows come home, but the reality is, if people have got clarity about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they do it, then there's a chance it'll succeed.
I think we've always felt here at Osiris that pedagogy is pedagogy, and
yes, yeah.
andragogy is andragogy, and if you can stick within those bounds, then it's equally applicable. So yeah, great.
Totally.
Well, absolutely massive thanks, Martin, for joining us. And
not a problem. Thank you.